The review for Chapter 2, you must identify the difference between a population and a sample. The population is what group we're trying to make a decision about. The sample is part of that group. So if you look at the first situation, quality control is testing these links, and they take every fifth container and they find the average measure to be 15.7. So they're taking a sample. They did not look at the entire population. Again, the population is the group we're trying to make a decision about. Identify the types of bias. Well, in this situation, they're just grabbing out a fifth container. If they just took from the top, there is a selection bias because they left out the components or pieces in the middle or at the bottom. If we're talking about people and so forth, we might have a non-response bias, meaning the subject did not respond, or we might have a response bias. And response bias is you respond differently. For example, if I'm in an experiment and I got the placebo, the control, I might have responded and maybe it was to alleviate headaches and my headache went away, even though I didn't receive the medication. That's called a response bias. You'll have to identify some of those. Back to selection, it could be selecting components, it could be selecting people. If you have a phone survey, it's awfully hard to get all the people because they're unlisted numbers and so forth. So you've only selected the ones that you were available to get because their name was in the phone book and so forth. So you might want to take a look at those biases that we had. Sampling method. In this one, every fifth container, so that's called systematic. There is a procedure, a count-off, a system in order to get my sample. Now, the sampling methods must use probability. Probability tries to get everybody an equal chance. If they don't have an equal chance, then you have some bias. The different types of sampling method other than systematic would be cluster. Recall that cluster is the whole group. The entire group is selected as my sample, where stratified is taking some from each. We like to use stratified, especially when we're dealing with male and female, because in stratification, I'm guaranteed to get some males and some females, because those are my strata. If I was to do cluster, I'd either take all males or all females, which would be a biased sample. The other type of probability sampling method would be simple random sample, and that's when you simply draw out of a hat or use a random number generator. Now, we classify our values as parameters or statistics. A parameter comes from my population. A statistic comes from my sample. And so when we look at a statistics from a sample, this can vary depending on your sample. So if we had the same population, I took a sample and got a value. You took a sample. Our samples are most likely different, i.e. then your values would be different as well. In a population or a parameter, we would be both taking the whole group. So your group would be the same as my group because it's everyone involved, and there our values would be fixed or the same. So again, determine those values. Recall parameter, population, statistic, sample. Identify the different sampling methods from situations. Identify different types of bias. And lastly, determine whether it's a population or sample. Population is the whole group, what we're trying to make the decision about. That concludes the review for Chapter